Thank you. And then pull up the presentation. So welcome everyone to the Food Equity Fund Starter Fund info session. Our goal today is to walk through the application process, eligibility requirements, and just what to expect. We'll give also examples of a strong application, and then we'll stop the recording and then have the rest of the time to answer any of your questions. Next slide, please. Next slide. That's our goals for the day. So as you know, the sweetened beverage tax is what makes the Food Equity Fund possible. The fund was created by the Community Advisory Board, who is responsible for making funding recommendations to the city on how this tax should be spent. The intent of this fund is to specifically invest in community food work that is led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrants, refugees, people with low incomes, youth, and/or elders. Next slide, please. So we do have a few eligibility requirements. Every project that is funded must have their project activities occur within Seattle. It also must be accessible and benefit people who either live, learn, work, and/or worship in Seattle. There must be a focus on contributing to an equitable and sustainable local food system, which we'll talk more about soon. And it must be completed within 24 months of signing your contract. Next slide, please. So here's a great visual about how we think about the food system. As you can see, we know that food is deeply interconnected and part of a cycle. It's not linear, and we know you all may work at multiple levels of the food system. So this could include growing food, harvesting culturally relevant food, preparing, eating and sharing traditional foods, distributing foods, or even managing food waste. So this is kind of our vision for a local food system. Next slide, please. So these pictures, this is just great demonstration of some examples of eligible activities. It's by no means comprehensive, but some examples is that you could apply for funding to expand your urban garden, to grow more culturally relevant food. You can have a food pantry distribution. You could have work related to teaching and learning about food in your cultural traditions. It's important to know we also fund physical improvements. You'll see that greenhouse or garden beds. This can include a new irrigation system, a commercial kitchen. There's really lots of possibilities here. But as long as it's increasing equity within the food system or making the food system more sustainable, it's an eligible activity. Next slide, please. So here are some expenses that unfortunately we are not able to pay for through this grant program. I'm just going to highlight a few and not get into each one of these, but for example, we won't be able to fund any for-profit activities. So this includes fundraisers, ticketed events, any retail events. We also can't fund food vouchers or gift cards, purchases of vehicles, scholarships, projects that are not easily accessible by the public. So if you have to be a member or have a certain credential to access the event, that's unfortunately not eligible. We try to be comprehensive in this list, but if there are any questions or hesitations or you'd like clarity on something, please feel free to contact a Food Equity Fund project manager and we will be able to answer your question directly. Next slide, please. So who is eligible? This is actually quite unique to our starter fund. This starter fund was intentionally created to reach smaller grassroots organizations that don't have access to institutional funding as much. So organizations that have a 501c3 nonprofit status, their annual budget must be less than $500,000 annually. Or if you're a community group, you can that with less than $500,000 in your annual budget, you could work with a fiscal sponsor with a 501c3 nonprofit status to apply. We also encourage tribes and tribal organizations to apply. Next slide, please. We do have some ineligible applicants. We cannot accept applications from 501c4s, political groups, as well as for-profit entities. This includes small businesses, restaurants, any entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs that are working in the food system. We understand the value of that work, but unfortunately, given the fund structure, we'll not be able to accept applications at this time from these entities. Individual person, so you can't just be one person applying for this. And then we also can't accept applications from major institutions, so school districts, colleges, universities, hospitals. And again, if you have any questions about this, please contact us directly. Next slide, please. So here is our starter fund schedule. We kind of had a quiet launch. On April 1st, our award amounts are from $5,000 to $25,000. This changed slightly from last year. Last year was 20, so please note the difference. You can go up to 25,000. Proposal length is up to 24 months. We have a rolling deadline from now until October 1st or until funding runs out. For context, last year we ran out of funding about a month before the deadline and anticipate something very similar. We approximately have $270,000 available as of today. That may increase, but as of today, that's our funding availability. And so we expect to make about 10 to 11 grants on a first come and first served basis. So once you submit your written materials to the Food Equity Fund at seattle.gov, we will do a review of it and then schedule a required virtual interview that happens every Tuesday from 2 to 3:30. And then we'll notify you quite quickly after your interview. We expect to give notifications of decisions within 3 weeks of your interview. In fairness to others, applicants will only be able to apply for this funding once per calendar year. So if you are, for whatever reason, denied in 2024, we ask that you wait until 2025 to apply if the grant reopens next year. Next slide, please. So what's our application process? We highly encourage you to review our 2024 guidelines, which I'm going to ask Chien to include a link in our chat. I highly recommend that you make sure it's the most updated 2024 guidelines. We made a few slight changes from 2023. So even if this is a grant that you're familiar with, I highly recommend to make sure you're downloading and getting the most updated materials. So review the guidelines. Next slide. And then download the key forms. Again, these have slightly changed from 2023. So these forms include the application cover sheet, the narrative questions, the project, the work plan and leadership bio, and the grant request budget. And then you may need to gather additional materials like your 501c3 determination letter, or if you're making physical improvements, a property owner permission, which we'll get into later. Next slide, please. If you would like, this is just a tip, it's optional, but we highly recommend it. If you'd like to have any support on your application, you can contact a Food Equity Fund project manager to provide support, and they will actually even be able to review a draft application and give you feedback. So if you just email us at foodequityfund@seattle.gov, we can get that started. Next slide. And then once you're all finished, once you feel good about your application and have filled out all of the required materials, you'll send the application and all the attachments by email to foodequityfund@seattle.gov. Next slide. And again, once we review it for eligibility and it's able to move forward to the virtual interview component, we will reach out to you to schedule the next available Tuesday slot for that interview, and you'll work, and it'll be Tuesday from 2 to 3:30. And at that time, we'll also share with you the questions we'll ask during the virtual interview. Next slide, please. Here are all the different ways you can receive application assistance. We have these info sessions. Obviously, a recording will be available online. We also provide one-on-one technical support. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions about the fund, maybe help figure out whether or not the work that you're doing is eligible, or if you have property ownership questions. We may assist you in your search for a fiscal sponsor, or explain insurance requirements, or give you feedback on a draft application. So there's many ways in which we can provide one-on-one support. We currently only accept applications in written English. However, if you'd like one-on-one support in a language other than English, we can set up a virtual interview or meeting with an interpreter at no cost to you. Just let us know. And yeah, you can always reach out to us and set up a virtual meeting or phone call. And now I will pass it to my colleague Lorna to get into the application form itself.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we're going to get into the application and also some of the written responses. For this part, I will be referencing the evaluation criteria located on page 13 and 14 of the guideline, and we're including it in your chat and can be downloaded from the website. For a quick reminder, please make sure that you are using our 2024 forms, as some of the questions are different from last year's capacity grant. So the first document is the application cover. And this is where we capture important information about you and your group name, contact information, amount of funding requested up to $24,000, the length of your project, primary location, and the community that will be part of your proposal. Please make sure that you're giving us accurate email and phone number. We will be using this to schedule your virtual interview. And question number 4, under the brief description of your grant request, you have about 2 to 4 sentences to summarize the essential parts of your work. You will, however, have an opportunity to expand more on this in the narrative questions. Next slide, please. So for this grant, we only ask 3 questions, and we'd like for you to answer in writing. In the next few slides, we will go through these questions one by one, and we will share with you how each question will be evaluated and also present some examples. So these 3 questions are basically trying to get to who you are as an organization, what you're going to do, and who will benefit. Next slide, please. So these are just some tips and tricks to share with you. We will be using the scoring guideline, the evaluation criteria again, on pages 13, 14 as a reference. So for the Food Equity Fund staff who will be reading your application, we will be reviewing it for for eligibility, and also if the project description is aligned with your work plan, your budget, and the leadership and team members involved in your project, and that it all makes sense and that it's doable. And just to remember, being clear is more important than the length of your answer. The more pages doesn't necessarily mean the better the score. Next slide, please. So here's question 1. Briefly share your organization or group's history, mission, and vision. Please share a successful effort or accomplishment that aligns with your proposed work. In the evaluation, we are looking at is it clear and the group's history, mission, and vision is aligned with the proposal? Does the example of accomplishments clearly align with the proposed work? So, for example, if your project proposal includes working with young people to start their own garden, give an example of a successful accomplishment of working with young people to complete a meaningful project. Next slide, please. Second question. Who is the community you are a part of, and how are they engaged throughout your proposed work? You may also include any existing partnerships and their role in your response. So how we're evaluating this, we're asking if the community that you're a part of is clearly defined. Are priority communities key decision makers and or involved at most phases of the proposed work? So back to the example of young people starting their own garden. Can you speak to how the youth leaders are selected? Are they already a part of your existing program? And if not, is there a clear outreach plan? Are the youth involved with building the garden beds? Maybe the youth decide to have a workshop on native plants. And who's involved in creating the curriculum? So these questions just serve as examples. We know that each program is unique and distinct. So next slide, please. Here's question number 3. Please briefly describe what you will do with a starter fund grant. Please use the work plan and budget templates to go into further detail. So for evaluation, is the description of your project activities clear? Are your activities specific and actionable? And is it aligned with the budget and the work plan? Is it consistent with the Food Equity Fund's purpose, which is to contribute to an equitable and sustainable local food system? For example, if the project is a youth-led garden, your description may include the number of youth you'll be working with, how many garden beds they will build, and also what Seattle location the garden beds will be in. And if education is a part of this, what does the curriculum look like? And what are they learning about the local food system? So now I want to pass it over to Chien to go over the next few slides.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the work plan and leadership bio is one of the application attachment and is in Microsoft Word document. So in this document, you will see the work plan section first. What we are looking for here is what are the 4 to 6 high-level milestones for your project. Your milestones should be clear, specific, and actionable. Also, all your project milestones should be related and build on each other. Your goal here is to make it easy for the reviewer to follow and understand how you plan to carry out your proposal. When do you plan to do these milestones? How will you complete these milestones? And are the time frame you have allotted to complete each milestone realistic? Reviewer will also look to see if your milestone align with your project narrative and budget. So here's a quick example of a milestone for a youth garden project. So identify up to 10 youths to participate in a monthly garden leadership training. So this is very clear and specific milestone because it tells you the number of youth they will reach, how often is the garden leadership training program. It also tells you how they will accomplish their milestone. They will accomplish this milestone by working with existing students and do one-on-one outreach at high school A. And when will this happen and for how long? They will start this in June and finish in August 2024. So those are just an example. While our grant is for up to 24 months, please do not feel pressure to stretch your work plan or timeline to 24 months. Your project could be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever make the most sense for your project. Next slide, please. So the leadership biography. The second section is the leadership bio. What reviewers are looking for here is, are your team member and key leaders working on this project reflect the lived experiences of the community they work with? So here is an example of a project team member's bio. Jen Doe, her role in this project is doing community outreach. Then you will want to share her experience in that role. Um, Here he shows that she is a West Seattle resident for more than 10 years. She has 5 years of a case management experience connecting immigrant and refugee youth, assessing local resources and educational program. She also has 3-year volunteer experiences for ABC Youth Center, helping with the bilingual social media post and flyer distribution. Next slide, please. Grant request budget. This is also a separate application material. In this space, you should only include expenses that will be paid for by the starter fund dollars. The maximum amount you can be awarded is $25,000. Therefore, this budget should not exceed $25,000. Reviewer will be looking for the following. Is the budget feasible? Does it align with the attached work plan and narrative? If your budget doesn't capture the full picture of your proposal, or if there are area of your budget you feel like you want to explain a little bit more, please use the budget narrative section. The budget narrative section is optional, but maybe the starter fund is only funding a portion of your project and you want to explain your other source of funding. The budget narrative section is where you can explain it. And let's just go over the 4 category of the budget. You may or may not have expenditure in every category. Personnel. This category is pretty self-explanatory. Use this section if you plan to either pay existing staff to accomplish key project tasks or if you intend to hire additional staff. Professional services. Complete this section of the budget if you plan to hire an independent contractor or consultant who will provide more short-term services to the project. Fiscal sponsorship is one example. Other example of services are facilitator, educator, contractor, artist, um, and supplies and materials. Any products that you want to purchase will typically go into this section. For example, food, gardening tools, seeds, paper products, etc. Capital expenses. You would only use this category if you are building something that is staying permanently. If that is the case, you are required to include a 15% contingency for all construction-related costs, including sales tax. Anyone who has ever done any remodeling know that during the actual construction, something will happen that you don't anticipate. So when you include a 15% contingency in your budget, you will have the resources to cover any unanticipated cost. Next slide, please. So after you have finished the narrative question, work plan, leadership bio, and budget portion of the application, there are a few other things that may apply to you and will complete the application. So if you are a 501c3 organization, you should have a letter from the IRS. If the document has been lost, we have included an online search tool. Now we'll copy and paste the link in the chat that you can use to get a copy of your IRS determination letter. If you are not a 501c3 organization, you will need a 501c3 fiscal sponsor. The fiscal sponsor is an organization that assumes financial responsibility for the project. They will submit your request for reimbursement and will receive payment from the city. Fiscal sponsor typically charge a fee in the range of 5 to 10% of the grant amount. If you already have one, great. Please include your existing agreement Or if you have identified one, please include their contact information, address, phone number, and email address in the application cover sheet. Next slide, please. Property owner permission letter is another additional material you will need to provide at the time of the application if this is applicable to your project. You will notice that we specifically asked about this in the application cover sheet, page 4, question 7. In general, if you are building on or making an improvement to a piece of property that your organization does not own, you will need a written permission from the property owner at the time of the application. This includes both public and private property. Project that will occur on city property will be reviewed by the appropriate city department once a final application has been submitted. If you have a physical improvement project, we highly encourage you to work with the full equity fund staff early in the application process. Next slide, please. So let's look at a few examples here about the property owner permission. Building a greenhouse or building a new garden bed would need property owner permission with your application. However, confirming a location for a conference is something that can be done within the contract period, as any number of locations might be appropriate. It does not have to be confirmed at the time of the application. Next slide, please. So earlier, my colleague already talked about the virtual interview. Here is a copy of the interview questions. These questions are also available in the application form for your reference. Please do review page 12 of the Starter Fund guideline, which talk about the reviewers, what reviewers are looking for in terms of the virtual interview. And please note that in addition to these 3 questions listed here, there may be additional project-specific questions asked during the virtual interview. If yes, program staff will for sure share the additional question to the application, so there's no surprise. Next slide, please. What to expect if awarded. If funded, organization and or fiscal sponsor will be required to attend an orientation, finalize project outcome, payment structure, and sign a contract with the city, have a current City of Seattle business license, secure and provide evidence of commercial general liability insurance. This is a liability coverage that is provided at the time of contracting and must be active throughout the length of the contract, and adding City of Seattle as additional insured. If applicable, secure Washington State Patrol background check. This is mainly applied to people that have project working with youth under the age of 18. We may ask for proof of background checks, and you can also include that expense in your budget. And then, of course, comply with the federal ADA requirement. If you're doing a design and capital project, we just need to make sure they are following the federal law to provide readily accessible facilities. If this requirement is applicable to you, especially if the improvement is on city property, we can also connect you and refer you to the appropriate staff for guidance. Next slide, please. So here's a quick list of a completed application. It has all of these required materials. Application cover sheet, narrative questions, application, the project work plan and leadership bio, the grant request budget, and then any additional materials such as the 501c3 determination letter or fiscal sponsor contact information, and if applicable, the property owner permission letter. Next slide, please. And here's a list of all of the full equity fund staff, our email addresses. If you would like to contact any one of us directly, maybe I'll wait just a little bit. Our information is also available on our webpage as well, our contact information. Next slide, please. I'm gonna pass it back to Lisa Chan.
Hey, Miriam, we can stop the recording.